The dust swirled around Catherine's boots as she arranged her late husband's tools on the weathered table outside her modest homestead. Each hammer and chisel a reminder that Richard was gone and never coming back. Nebraska City sprawled before her in the late afternoon sun of 1876, its wooden buildings casting long shadows across the rutted Main Street, while the Missouri River glinted in the distance like scattered coins. She had placed a hand-painted sign against the fence post that read "Tools for Sale, Fair Price," in letters that wavered slightly because her hands had trembled when she painted them 3 days after burying Richard. The fever had taken him so quickly that Katherine barely had time to process the transformation from loving husband to cold body wrapped in their best quilt. 6 months had passed since that terrible week in March, and now September's cooling breezes reminded her that another winter approached, this time without Richard's wages from the mill or his strong arms to chop firewood. The small amount of money they had saved was nearly gone, spent on the doctor who could not save him and the undertaker who buried him on the hill overlooking the river where Richard had always said he felt closest to God. Katherine was 24 years old, too young to be a widow, too old to return to her parents' home in Ohio, where her father would say he had warned her about marrying a mill worker and heading west. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from a face that had grown thinner over the past months, and her gray dress, though clean and mended, showed the wear of too many washings. She had been pretty once, she supposed, but grief and worry had carved lines around her eyes that made her feel ancient. The tools gleamed in the sunlight, freshly oiled and arranged with care. Richard had been meticulous about his possessions, teaching Katherine the name and purpose of each implement during the 2 years of their marriage. There were hammers of various sizes, a complete set of chisels, hand saws with teeth she had sharpened herself following his instructions, planes for smoothing wood, a brace and bit set, measuring tools, and his prized leather tool belt that still held the shape of his waist. She had decided to sell them after Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house had mentioned that her son was looking for good tools, and Katherine realized that keeping them was pure sentiment when what she needed was practical survival. A rider approached from the direction of town, his horse kicking up small clouds of dust that caught the golden light. Katherine straightened her shoulders and smoothed her skirt, preparing herself for negotiation. She had practiced what to say, determined not to let anyone cheat her simply because she was a woman alone. Richard would have wanted her to get fair value for his possessions. The rider drew closer, and Katherine saw he was tall in the saddle, with broad shoulders and the easy posture of someone who spent most of his life on horseback. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty from travel, with a hat pulled low enough to shade his face from the afternoon sun. As he reined in his horse near her fence, he pushed the hat back, revealing a weathered face that might have been anywhere from late 20s to mid-30s, with blue eyes that studied the tools with genuine interest, rather than the calculating sharpness she had expected. "Afternoon, madam," he said, dismounting with fluid grace. "Saw your sign from the road. I'm in need of good tools if the price is right." His voice was deep and pleasant, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas or Oklahoma territory. Katherine noticed his hands as he removed his gloves. They were work-hardened but clean, with long fingers that looked capable of both strength and precision. "Good afternoon," Katherine replied, keeping her voice steady. "These tools belong to my late husband. They are well-maintained and of excellent quality. I am asking fair market prices for each item." Something shifted in the man's expression, a softening around the eyes that suggested sympathy without pity. "I am sorry for your loss, madam. May I examine them?" "Of course." Katherine watched as he moved to the table, his attention immediately drawn to the tools with what appeared to be genuine appreciation, rather than the cursory interest of someone looking to exploit a desperate situation. He picked up a hand plane, turning it over in his hands, testing the blade's edge with his thumb, checking the adjustment mechanism with the careful attention of someone who understood craftsmanship. "This is fine work. Your husband took good care of his tools." "He believed tools were an extension of a man's hands," Katherine said, surprised by how much it hurt to speak of Richard in past tense, even after 6 months. "He said poor tools made poor work, and he refused to accept anything less than excellence." The stranger nodded, setting down the plane and picking up one of the chisels. "He was right about that. I am Vernon Walsh, madam. I have recently acquired property about 5 miles west of here, along Muddy Creek. The previous owner let the buildings fall into considerable disrepair, and I need tools to make the place livable before winter sets in properly." "Katherine Lancaster," she offered, then added, "Widow Lancaster, I suppose, though I am still getting used to thinking of myself that way." Vernon's blue eyes met hers with understanding. "Grief does not follow a schedule, Mrs. Lancaster. Some things take time to feel real." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience rather than empty platitude. Katherine found herself studying him more carefully, noting the signs of someone who worked hard and honestly. The sun-weathered skin, the calluses on his hands, the mended places on his clothing done with neat stitches that suggested either a patient nature or the absence of someone to do such tasks for him. "How much are you asking for the complete set?" Vernon asked, gesturing to the table. Katherine had calculated figures carefully, comparing prices from the general store and hardware merchant in town. $75 for everything. The tools alone would cost nearly twice that new, and these have been proven reliable. She watched his face for signs of mockery or dismissal, but Vernon simply nodded thoughtfully, his gaze moving over the collection. "That is more than fair, Mrs. Lancaster. I would be a fool to pass up such an opportunity." He paused, then added, "Though I wonder if I might make a different proposal." Katherine's heart sank. Here it came, the bargaining down, the suggestion that a widow should be grateful for whatever she could get. She lifted her chin, preparing to hold firm on her price, but Vernon surprised her. "These tools tell me your husband was a skilled craftsman. The care they show suggests expertise beyond simple maintenance. Did he teach you about woodworking, Mrs. Lancaster?" The question caught her off guard. "Some. Richard believed I should understand his work. He taught me to sharpen tools, to read wood grain, to measure and mark accurately. He said knowledge was never wasted." Wise man. Vernon leaned against the fence, his posture relaxed but his attention focused entirely on Katherine. "Here is my situation, Mrs. Lancaster. I have a ranch that needs extensive repair work. The barn roof leaks in 3 places, the corral fences are falling down, the house itself needs new window frames and door repairs, and I have not even begun to assess what needs doing inside. I can do rough carpentry, but finish work is beyond my skill. I need someone with knowledge of proper woodworking, someone who can help me make that place not just functional but solid enough to last." Katherine felt her pulse quicken with something she could not quite name. "I am not certain I understand what you are proposing, Mr. Walsh." "I would like to purchase these tools at your asking price," Vernon said clearly, "and then I would like to hire you to come work for me, using these very tools to help restore my property. I can pay $30 a month plus room and board, with the understanding that once the major repairs are completed, you would be free to stay on in a permanent position if you chose, or to take your wages and make whatever other arrangements you prefer." The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Katherine needed a moment to process them. A job, real employment with wages that would allow her to save money, to make plans, to imagine a future beyond simply surviving each day. "Mr. Walsh, I appreciate the offer, but I must be honest. While Richard taught me much, I am hardly a skilled carpenter. I would not want to accept payment under false pretenses." Vernon's expression remained serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Lancaster, I have been trying to make repairs on my own for 2 months now, and the results are, frankly, terrible. I can tell by looking at these tools that your husband knew his craft, and you have said he taught you. Even if you only know the basics, that is more than I know about finish carpentry. I need someone who understands which tool to use for which purpose, who can measure twice and cut once, who can teach me the right way to approach repairs rather than my current method of attempting things and hoping for the best." Katherine's mind raced through the implications. Moving to his ranch would mean leaving this small homestead that she and Richard had rented, but the rent was due again in 2 weeks, and she had no way to pay it. It would mean living on the property of a man she had just met, which would certainly cause talk in town, though Vernon had mentioned room and board as separate from his own accommodations, suggesting proper arrangements. Most importantly, it would mean honest work and honest wages at a time when options for widows were limited to taking in laundry, sewing, or accepting charity from the church. "I would require separate accommodations," Katherine said carefully. "I will not have my reputation compromised, Mr. Walsh, no matter how desperate my circumstances might appear." "Of course," Vernon agreed immediately. "There is a small cabin on the property, originally built for a foreman or hired hand. It needs some repair, naturally, but it has a good stone fireplace, solid walls, and it is situated a respectable distance from the main house. I would make it properly weatherproof before you arrived, and I would expect you to make your own arrangements regarding meals and personal time. When we work together on repairs, I follow standard employment practices, daylight hours, appropriate conduct, wages paid on time." The formality of his speech, so different from his earlier casual manner, told Katherine that he understood the delicacy of the situation and was trying to reassure her of his intentions. She found herself wanting to trust him, which frightened her almost as much as the prospect of remaining here without income. "May I have a day to consider your offer?" Katherine asked. "This is not a decision to make lightly." "Take 2 days if you need them," Vernon replied. "I am staying at Henderson's boarding house in town. You can send word there, or come speak with me directly if you have questions. I will be here until Friday afternoon, then I need to return to the ranch regardless of your decision." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out $75 in bills and coins, placing them carefully on the table beside the tools. "Payment for the tools, Mrs. Lancaster. They are worth every penny, and I am grateful to have them whether you decide to accept the employment offer or not." Katherine stared at the money, more cash than she had seen since Richard's death. It would pay her overdue rent, buy food and fuel for winter, perhaps even allow her to purchase fabric for a new dress to replace the worn morning clothes that were her only option. But it would not last forever, and then she would be right back where she started, desperate and alone. "I will give you my answer by Thursday evening," Katherine said, meeting his eyes directly. "That should allow you time to make other arrangements if I decline." Vernon nodded and extended his hand. Katherine hesitated only a moment before shaking it, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers. His grip was firm but not crushing, respectful of her strength rather than overwhelming it. "I hope you will consider it seriously, Mrs. Lancaster. I believe it could be a good situation for both of us." You would have honest work and a safe place to live while you decide your future, and I would have the help I desperately need to make my ranch functional before the first snow falls." After Vernon rode away, Katherine gathered the money and carried it inside her small house. Sitting at the kitchen table Richard had built during their first month in Nebraska City. The silence pressed around her, as it always did now, empty of Richard's humming while he worked or his voice reading aloud from the newspaper in the evenings. She counted the money 3 times, though she trusted Vernon's arithmetic. $75. It felt like a fortune and an impossibility at the same time. But the job offer, that was what occupied her thoughts as evening fell, and she prepared her simple supper. The next morning, Katherine walked into town, her best shawl wrapped against the September chill, and went directly to see Reverend Thomas at the Methodist Church. He and his wife had been kind to her after Richard's death, and she trusted their judgment about people and situations. Reverend Thomas listened carefully to her explanation, his weathered face thoughtful. "Vernon Walsh, you say? I have met him, actually. He attended services last Sunday, seemed a decent man, respectful and attentive during the sermon. He introduced himself afterward and mentioned he was new to the area, hoping to establish his ranch and become part of the community." "What did you think of him?" Katherine asked. The Reverend considered his words carefully. "He struck me as honest and straightforward. He has the manner of someone accustomed to hard work and simple living. I asked around after meeting him, as I like to know who is settling in our area. Tom Preston at the land office said Walsh paid cash for his property, no debts or outstanding claims. The blacksmith mentioned Vernon brought in some tools for repair and paid on time without haggling. Small things, perhaps, but they speak to character. Mrs. Lancaster," the Reverend's wife added, "I do not wish to be indelicate, but your situation here is precarious. Winter is coming, and you have no income. If Mr. Walsh is offering honest employment with proper accommodations, it may be an answer to our prayers for your welfare." Katherine had known they would say something like this, but hearing it aloud made the decision feel more real and more frightening. "I am concerned about appearances. A widow living on an unmarried man's property, working alongside him. People will talk. People always talk, Mrs. Thomas said with surprising firmness. "The question is whether you allow their talk to matter more than your survival. You would be his employee, not his mistress. There is nothing shameful about honest work." After leaving the church, Katherine stopped at the general store where she sometimes helped with inventory in exchange for credit on supplies. Mr. Chen, who ran the store with his wife, greeted her with his usual courtesy. "Mrs. Lancaster, I was hoping you would come by. I heard someone bought all your husband's tools yesterday. I hope you got a fair price." "I did," Katherine confirmed. "The buyer was a man named Vernon Walsh. Do you know him?" Mr. Chen nodded. "He has been in several times for supplies. Always polite, always pays in full. He bought quality goods, not the cheapest options, which suggests he knows the difference. He asked me about finding reliable workers for his ranch, and I told him good help was hard to find but worth paying fairly for." He paused, studying Katherine's face. "Did he offer you work?" "How did you know?" He asked specifically if I knew any women looking for honest employment. Said he needed help with finish carpentry and household management. I thought it an unusual request, but when I heard about the tools, I suspected he might approach you. Mr. Chen's expression was serious but not disapproving. "My wife and I came to this country with nothing but our willingness to work hard. Sometimes opportunity comes in unexpected forms, Mrs. Lancaster. The question is whether you have the courage to seize it." That evening, Katherine sat down with paper and pen and made a practical list of considerations. The rent on her current house was due in 12 days, and she could not pay it. She had enough food for perhaps 3 more weeks if she was very careful. Winter fuel would cost money she did not have. Her options for employment in Nebraska City were limited to work that paid so little she would barely survive, even if she could find it. Against that, Vernon Walsh offered $30 a month, which was fair wages for skilled labor, plus room and board, which eliminated her 2 biggest expenses. He had paid full price for the tools without negotiating, suggesting honesty in his dealings. Everyone she had asked about him had given the same assessment: decent, hardworking, respectful, honest. The real question, Katherine realized, was not whether to accept Vernon's offer, but whether she was brave enough to step into an unknown future. Richard had been safe and familiar, their life together modest but comfortable. His death had shattered that security, leaving her adrift in a world that had little patience for widows without family or independent means. She could try to cling to the remnants of her old life here in this rented house, slowly depleting her resources until desperation forced her to accept whatever scraps of charity came her way. Or she could take a chance on something new. Thursday afternoon, Katherine packed her few belongings into a battered trunk and 2 carpetbags. She scrubbed the rental house clean, leaving it as tidy as she had found it, then walked into town in her best dress with her answer written on a piece of paper folded in her pocket, though she knew she would deliver it aloud. She found Vernon at Henderson's boarding house, sitting on the front porch and working on what appeared to be a broken bridle, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he stitched new leather into place. He looked up when her shadow fell across him, and something in his expression, hope mixed with apprehension, told Katherine that her answer mattered to him more than just the practical need for help. "Mr. Walsh," she said formally, "I have given your offer careful consideration and I accept the position. When would you like me to begin?" Vernon stood quickly, nearly dropping the bridle in his haste. "Mrs. Lancaster, I am glad to hear it, truly glad. I can take you out to the ranch tomorrow morning if that suits you. I will load your belongings in my wagon, and we can stop at Chen's store for any additional supplies you might need." "Tomorrow morning would be acceptable," Katherine agreed. "I have already given notice on my rental house, and my possessions are packed. I will be ready by dawn if you prefer an early start." They agreed on the details with businesslike efficiency. But as Katherine walked back to her small house for the last time, she felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement beneath the anxiety. She was stepping off a cliff, trusting that Vernon Walsh was what he appeared to be rather than something darker hidden behind a pleasant facade. But the alternative was a slower fall into poverty and dependence, and at least this way she was choosing her own path. The next morning broke clear and cool, with the kind of crystalline light that made everything seem freshly created. Vernon arrived as promised, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 well-matched horses. He loaded Katherine's trunk and bags without comment on how little she owned, settling them securely in the wagon bed alongside supplies from the general store. "I took the liberty of purchasing some basics for your cabin," he explained as they set out. "Coffee, flour, salt, sugar, dried beans, a few other necessities. You will want to assess what else you need once you see the place. We can make another trip to town in a few days for anything I overlooked." The road west from Nebraska City wound through rolling prairie interspersed with stands of cottonwood and willow that marked the course of creeks and drainage channels. Vernon kept the horses to a steady walk, apparently in no hurry, and Katherine found herself relaxing slightly as the miles passed. He did not press her for conversation, but answered readily when she asked questions about the area. The property is 160 acres, he explained. Previous owner was a man named Gerald Thorne, who had ambitions of raising horses but not much skill for following through. He built the main house and barn, started the corral and cabin, then gave up after 2 hard winters and sold out. I got it for a fair price because of all the repair work needed, but the land itself is good. Creek runs year-round, good grass for cattle or horses, enough timber for fuel and fence repair. "What do you plan to raise?" Katherine asked. "Cattle primarily, with a few horses for working stock." I spent the last 10 years working on ranches in Texas and Oklahoma, learning the business from the ground up. Saved every penny I could, and when I heard about land available up here in Nebraska, I decided it was time to make my own way. He glanced at her with a slight smile. "I am 32 years old, Mrs. Lancaster. If I wait much longer, I will be too old and tired to put in the work required to build something lasting." 32 is hardly ancient, Katherine replied. "My husband was only 30 when he died, and he always said life was just beginning to make sense to him." Vernon's expression sobered. "How long were you married?" 2 years. "We met in Ohio, where I was teaching in a small school and Richard was working as a carpenter. He wanted to head west, said there were opportunities in the growing towns of Nebraska. I agreed to come with him after we married." Katherine looked out across the prairie, remembering. "We were happy here. The work was hard but satisfying." Richard loved building things, seeing structures take shape under his hands. He had plans for opening his own workshop eventually. The fever. Yes, it came on suddenly, and by the time we realized how serious it was, nothing the doctor did seem to help. He was gone within a week. Katherine's voice remained steady, though she felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "The worst part was how helpless I felt. I tried everything, every remedy, every prayer, and none of it mattered. He just slipped away." Vernon was quiet for a moment, his attention apparently on the horses, but Katherine sensed he was giving her space to collect herself. Finally, he said, "My parents died of cholera when I was 19. Whole camp got sick, traveling west on the wagon train. They went within a day of each other." I understood what you said about feeling helpless. I kept thinking there must be something I could do, some way to stop what was happening, but disease does not negotiate or show mercy. "Is that when you started working on ranches?" "That is when I realized I was completely alone in the world," Vernon replied. "My younger sister had died years earlier from scarlet fever. Suddenly, I had no one, no family to return to, no home waiting. The wagon master was kind enough to see me through to California, but once there, I knew I needed to find my own way. Ranching was work I could do, and the bosses cared more about whether you worked hard than where you came from or who your people were." Katherine heard the loneliness in his words, recognizing it because it mirrored her own. They were both orphans in their own way, severed from the moorings of family and forced to navigate the world alone. The realization created a fragile sense of connection, the first time since Richard's death that she had felt understood by another person. They crested a long rise and Vernon gestured ahead. "There it is. Walsh Ranch, though calling it a ranch at this point is generous. More like a collection of buildings that desperately need attention." Katherine studied the property spread below them in a shallow valley where Muddy Creek curved through grassy bottomland. The main house was a simple 2-story structure with a steep roof, solidly built but clearly neglected. The barn was larger, with visible gaps in the siding and a roof that sagged ominously on one side. Corral fences leaned at precarious angles, and several outbuildings looked ready to collapse entirely. About 50 yards from the main house stood a smaller cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. I have been staying in the cabin while I worked on making it habitable, Vernon explained. I was planning to move into the main house once I got the worst of the repairs done, but that kept getting postponed because every time I fixed one thing, I discovered two more problems. With your help, I am hoping we can make real progress before winter sets in hard. As they descended into the valley, Katherine could see that, beneath the neglect, the property had good bones. The buildings were positioned sensibly in relation to water and prevailing winds. The creek banks showed signs of careful management at some point, with retained pools for watering livestock. Someone, probably the original builder, had understood the land and worked with it rather than against it. Vernon pulled the wagon up beside the cabin, and Katherine climbed down, studying what would be her new home. It was perhaps 15 feet square, with a door on the south side and two small windows that still had glass in their frames. The roof appeared sound, and the stone chimney looked professionally built. I replaced some of the chinking between the logs, Vernon said, and I patched a hole in the roof where a tree branch had damaged the shingles. The door needed new hinges, which I installed last week. Inside is basic but functional. I will help you carry your things in, then give you time to settle while I tend the horses. The cabin's interior was indeed basic but surprisingly clean and well organized. A narrow bed stood against one wall, neatly made with quilts that looked hand-stitched. A small table and two chairs occupied the center of the room, and a simple kitchen area held a cast iron stove, some open shelving, and a dry sink with a bucket for water. A battered wardrobe provided storage for clothing, and several hooks on the wall could hold coats and other items. The stone fireplace dominated the north wall, its hearth swept clean and ready for use. "This is quite nice," Katherine said, genuinely pleased. "You have made it very comfortable, Mr. Walsh. I am glad you approve. I will be moving to the main house starting tonight, so this space is entirely yours. The creek is about 30 yards that way," he pointed, "and I dug out a good spot for drawing water. Privy is behind that stand of willows, newly built and reasonably private. If you need anything or have concerns about the accommodations, please let me know." After Vernon left to see to the horses, Katherine unpacked her belongings slowly, taking time to adjust to her new surroundings. She hung her dresses in the wardrobe, placed Richard's Bible on the small shelf beside the bed, and arranged her few personal items to make the space feel more like home. The cabin was snug and well sealed against drafts, and the fireplace drew well when she tested it with a small fire. She had lived in worse places, certainly, and there was something appealing about the simplicity and privacy of the space. That evening, Vernon knocked on the door and invited her to join him for supper at the main house, explaining that he wanted to discuss the work plan for the coming weeks. Katherine agreed, curious to see the inside of the house and establish the working relationship they would need. The main house interior was spacious, but showed the same neglect as the exterior. The rooms were laid out sensibly, with a large kitchen and living area on the ground floor and what appeared to be 3 bedrooms upstairs. But the wallpaper was peeling, floorboards were loose and creaking, windows rattled in their frames, and a general air of desolation hung over everything. "I know it looks daunting," Vernon said as Katherine surveyed the kitchen, "but the structure itself is solid. Once we address the detail work, the weatherproofing and finishing, it will be a comfortable home." He had prepared a simple meal of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread, apologizing for his limited cooking skills. They ate at a scarred wooden table while Vernon outlined his priorities for repairs. "The barn roof is critical," he began. "I need to be able to shelter livestock through the winter, and right now the barn is barely functional. After that, the corral fences, then weatherproofing this house properly. I can handle the heavy structural work, but I need guidance on the finish carpentry, the door frames, window casements, interior repairs that require precision rather than brute force. Katherine listened carefully, her mind already assessing the challenges. I will need to examine everything closely to give you accurate advice, but from what I saw today, your priorities seem sound. We should start with a complete inventory of what needs doing, then create a systematic plan. Richard always said the biggest mistake in any project was jumping from task to task without a clear overall strategy. Vernon's face brightened. That has been exactly my problem. I start fixing the barn, then notice the fence falling down, so I work on that for a while, then get distracted by a leak in the house roof. I have been scattered and inefficient, and it shows. They spent the next hour discussing tools, materials, and techniques, and Katherine found herself relaxing into the familiar territory of carpentry talk. Vernon proved to be an attentive listener, asking intelligent questions and absorbing information without the defensiveness some men showed when a woman demonstrated expertise. He took notes on a piece of paper, sketching rough diagrams of repairs and noting measurements Katherine suggested. "You clearly learned well from your husband," Vernon observed. "He must have been an excellent teacher." "Richard was patient and thorough," Katherine agreed. "He believed that understanding the principles behind a technique was more important than simply memorizing steps. He taught me to think about what I was trying to accomplish, then select the approach that made the most sense for that specific situation. Wisdom I clearly need to apply," Vernon said ruefully. "I have been approaching these repairs like a bull charging a fence, all force and no finesse." Katherine smiled, her first genuine smile since arriving at the ranch. "Well, Mr. Walsh, that is why you hired me. Between your force and my finesse, we should make quite an effective team." The next morning, they began work in earnest. Katherine spent several hours surveying all the buildings, making detailed notes about every repair needed. Vernon followed along, pointing out problems he had already identified and listening as Katherine explained what she saw. Her trained eye caught issues he had missed: rotted sill plates hidden beneath intact siding, improperly flashed roof edges that would leak during spring rains, structural concerns that needed addressing before cosmetic repairs. By midday, Katherine had filled several pages with notes and created a comprehensive priority list. They sat in the shade of the barn to review her assessment, passing a canteen of water between them. "It is worse than I thought," Vernon admitted, studying her notes. "But at least now I know what I am facing. That is strangely comforting." "Knowledge is always better than ignorance," Katherine replied. "Even when the knowledge is daunting, now we can make intelligent decisions about how to proceed." They established a working rhythm over the following days. Vernon would handle the heavy labor, replacing damaged structural members, resetting fence posts, hauling materials. Katherine would do the precision work, cutting pieces to exact measurements, fitting joints, installing hardware, and teaching Vernon proper techniques as they went. They worked from dawn until late afternoon, then broke for the day to allow each their private time. Katherine found the work deeply satisfying in ways she had not anticipated. Using Richard's tools, applying the knowledge he had taught her, creating something solid and lasting from materials and skill. All of it felt like honoring his memory while also moving forward into her own life. The physical labor tired her body but quieted her mind, and she slept better than she had in months. Vernon proved to be an ideal employer and work partner. He accepted instruction without ego, worked tirelessly without complaint, and maintained appropriate professional distance while still being friendly and considerate. He asked about her comfort in the cabin, ensured she had adequate supplies, and paid her first month's wages early when he went into town for materials, saying he wanted her to have funds available if she needed anything. 3 weeks into her employment, they were working on replacing rotted window frames in the main house when Vernon suddenly laughed at something Katherine said about measuring techniques. The sound was so unexpected and genuinely joyful that Katherine stopped working and looked at him in surprise. "I apologize," Vernon said, his face slightly flushed. "It just occurred to me that I have not laughed like that in longer than I can remember. You have a clever way of putting things, Mrs. Lancaster. You make even technical explanations entertaining." Katherine felt warmth rise in her own cheeks. "Richard used to say I could make reading a grain catalog sound like an adventure story. He claimed it was my teacher's training, making information engaging so students would pay attention. Well, it works. I find myself looking forward to these daily lessons in proper carpentry." Vernon returned to his work, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them, a recognition of friendship developing beneath their professional relationship. As October arrived and the weather turned colder, their work took on increased urgency. The barn roof was completed just before a major rainstorm that would have caused significant damage to the interior. The corrals were reinforced and expanded to hold the cattle Vernon purchased from a rancher downriver. The main house became increasingly weatherproof as they methodically replaced windows, repaired doors, and sealed every gap against winter winds. Katherine found herself thinking about Vernon at odd moments when they were not working together. She noticed small things, the careful way he handled tools she had sharpened, his habit of singing quietly to himself when he thought no one could hear, the gentleness he showed toward the horses and cattle. He was kind without being weak, strong without being domineering, and he treated her with a respect that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with genuine regard for her abilities and opinions. She tried to tell herself that these observations were simply natural results of working closely with another person. But late at night in her cabin, Katherine admitted to herself that what she felt was attraction, dangerous and complicated and completely inappropriate given that she was his employee and still officially in mourning for Richard. One afternoon in mid-October, they were working together in the barn, repairing stall dividers when Vernon accidentally struck his thumb with a hammer. He let out a curse, quickly apologized for his language, and held his injured hand against his chest. "Let me see," Katherine said, setting down her tools. She took his hand gently, examining the thumb that was already beginning to swell and bruise. "You will lose the nail, most likely, but nothing appears broken. Come to the house and I will wrap it for you." In the kitchen, Katherine pumped cold water over Vernon's thumb to reduce the swelling, then bandaged it with strips of clean cloth. She was acutely aware of holding his hand, of standing close enough to feel the warmth of his body and smell the honest scent of his hard work. When she looked up to tell him the bandaging was complete, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Katherine," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. Then he seemed to catch himself, stepping back slightly. "Mrs. Lancaster, I apologize." That was inappropriate. "No," Katherine heard herself say. "It was not inappropriate. My name is Katherine." They stood looking at each other in the kitchen's afternoon light, the air between them charged with possibility and uncertainty. Vernon raised his uninjured hand as if to touch her face, then dropped it back to his side. "I am your employer," he said quietly. "You are in a vulnerable position, dependent on this job and the housing I provide. I will not take advantage of that, Katherine, no matter how much I might want to." The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Katherine felt her heart racing, torn between propriety and desire, between loyalty to Richard's memory and the undeniable pull she felt toward this man who had shown her such respect and kindness. "What if I want you to?" she whispered. Vernon closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Then I would tell you that I have been fighting my feelings for weeks now, that I think about you every moment we are apart, that I lie awake at night remembering your smile when you are pleased with a piece of work well done. But I would also tell you that those feelings do not give me the right to act on them, not when the power in our relationship is so unbalanced." "What if we balanced it?" Katherine asked, her mind racing ahead. "What if I were not your employee but your partner?" "Not in business," she added quickly, "but in building this ranch together, equal in our contributions and our stake in the outcome." Vernon opened his eyes, hope and caution warring in his expression. "How would that work?" Katherine thought quickly, trying to articulate ideas that had been forming unconsciously over the past weeks. "You need my skills and knowledge. I need security and purpose. What if instead of wages, you gave me a share in the ranch itself? We could formalize it legally, a partnership based on contribution rather than capital. Your land and resources, my expertise and labor, combined to create something neither of us could achieve alone. People would assume we were married or living in sin," Vernon pointed out. "Your reputation would suffer. My reputation as a poor widow barely surviving. I would rather risk gossip while building something real than protect my reputation while slowly failing." Katherine felt a fierce determination rising in her chest. "Besides, if we are business partners, living in separate houses on the same property, what happens between us in private is no one's concern but our own." Vernon studied her face carefully. "Are you certain? This is not a decision to make lightly or quickly. You have only been here a month. You may be reacting to proximity and shared work rather than genuine feeling." "Richard has been gone for 9 months," Katherine said steadily. "I loved him deeply, and I will always honor his memory. But he is gone, Vernon, and I am still alive. I am allowed to feel joy again, to want companionship, to build a future that is mine rather than simply enduring the present." She paused, then added, "Unless you are the one who needs more time to be certain." "I am certain that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met," Vernon replied. "I am certain that I want to know everything about you, that I admire your strength and intelligence, that I wake up eager to see you each morning. But I am also certain that I do not want to rush you into something you might regret. Your life has been turned upside down by grief and change. How can you trust what you feel right now?" Katherine considered his words seriously before answering. "Because what I feel with you is different from grief or desperation. When I am with you, I feel capable and valued. When we work together, I feel the satisfaction of partnership rather than the loneliness of solitary effort. And when you look at me the way you are looking at me right now, I feel something I had stopped believing I would ever feel again, hope for a future that holds not just survival but genuine happiness." Vernon closed the distance between them slowly, giving Katherine every opportunity to step away. When she did not, he cupped her face gently in his hands, his bandaged thumb resting softly against her cheek. "Then we will take this slowly and honestly," he said. "We will draw up a proper partnership agreement, equal shares in the ranch based on equal contribution. We will maintain separate households to protect your reputation, and we will allow whatever is growing between us to develop at its own pace, without pressure or expectations beyond honesty and mutual respect." "That sounds perfect," Katherine whispered. Then, because she was tired of always being proper and restrained, she rose on her toes and kissed him. Vernon responded with a tenderness that made Catherine's eyes sting with unexpected tears. His lips were gentle against hers, questioning rather than demanding, and his hands remained framing her face with careful reverence. It was nothing like the passionate kisses she had shared with Richard, but it was perfect in its own way, a beginning rather than a continuation. When they separated, Vernon rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing unsteadily. "I have wanted to do that since the day you agreed to work here," he admitted. "When you looked at me with such determination and courage, deciding to take a chance on an unknown future, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met." "I was terrified," Katherine confessed. "I am still terrified, if I am being honest. Everything is happening so fast, and I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Then we will face it together," Vernon promised. "Whatever challenges come, we will handle them as partners." They returned to work after that conversation, but everything felt different, charged with new possibility. Katherine caught Vernon watching her as she measured and marked wood for cutting, and she found herself smiling for no reason except the joy of his presence. When their hands brushed passing tools, the contact felt significant, a small affirmation of connection. That evening, Vernon rode into Nebraska City to speak with the lawyer who had handled his property purchase. 3 days later, he returned with legal documents that formalized their partnership. Katherine read every word carefully before signing. The agreement granted her a 25% share in the ranch in exchange for her labor and expertise over the next year, with additional shares available based on continued contribution. If she left before the year ended, she would receive prorated compensation. If either partner wished to dissolve the arrangement, fair market value would be established, and one partner could buy out the other. "It is generous," Katherine said, looking up from the papers. 25% seems high for 1 year's work." "It is fair compensation for expertise I desperately need," Vernon countered. "Besides, if this works the way I hope, you will never want to leave and your share will grow along with the ranch's value. Eventually, we might become equal partners in every sense." The word eventually carried unspoken implications that made Katherine's pulse quicken. She signed her name carefully, Katherine Marie Lancaster, and watched as Vernon countersigned and dated the document. They were now legally bound, not in marriage but in shared enterprise, and Katherine felt the weight of that commitment settle over her like a mantle of responsibility and promise. As autumn deepened toward winter, Katherine and Vernon worked with increased intensity to complete critical repairs. The main house became fully weatherproof, its windows sealed, doors hung properly, roof solid against rain and coming snow. Katherine moved from room to room, addressing smaller projects that made the house not just functional but comfortable, installing shelving, repairing damaged plaster, even building a proper dish dresser for the kitchen using wood reclaimed from a collapsed outbuilding. Vernon watched her work with open admiration, often telling her that she had more skill in her smallest finger than he had in his entire body. Katherine deflected the compliments but treasured them privately, storing them away like precious stones to examine later in her cabin when she was alone. Their personal relationship developed alongside their professional partnership. With the same careful deliberation they applied to construction projects. Vernon came to Katherine's cabin for supper several times a week, and she cooked meals that stretched her limited repertoire while he praised everything she made. They talked about everything: childhoods and dreams, losses and hopes, daily observations and long-term ambitions. Katherine learned that Vernon loved poetry though he pretended not to, that he had once wanted to be a schoolteacher before circumstances pushed him toward ranching, that his favorite time of day was early morning when the world felt fresh and full of possibility. Vernon learned that Katherine had a dry sense of humor that caught people by surprise, that she was more radical in her politics than her quiet demeanor suggested, that she missed teaching and sometimes thought about starting a small school for ranch children in the area. He learned that she still dreamed about Richard sometimes and woke up crying, but the dreams were changing from nightmares of loss to gentler memories of shared happiness. He learned that she was stronger than she looked and braver than she knew. In early November, the first serious snow arrived, blanketing the ranch in pristine white and forcing them to suspend outdoor work. Katherine and Vernon spent the day in the main house, working on interior repairs that could be done regardless of weather. They installed new door hardware, repaired broken stair railings, and rebuilt a section of the upstairs hallway floor that had become dangerously soft. As evening approached and the snow continued to fall, Vernon looked out at the growing accumulation with concern. "You should stay in the house tonight," he said. "The path to your cabin will be difficult in this snow, and more is coming. You can have one of the upstairs bedrooms. I will stay down here by the kitchen fire." Katherine knew she should refuse, should insist on returning to her cabin to maintain proper appearances. But the thought of walking through knee-deep snow in the dark held no appeal, and she trusted Vernon to respect the boundaries they had established. "If you are certain it would not be inappropriate," she said carefully. "We are business partners sharing shelter during a storm," Vernon replied. "Anyone who wants to make something sinister out of that has too much time and too little sense." Katherine settled into one of the upstairs bedrooms after sharing a simple supper with Vernon. The room was cold despite the fire he had built in the small fireplace, and she piled every quilt she could find onto the bed. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind howl around the house and thinking about Vernon sleeping downstairs, separated from her by floorboards and propriety and the complicated weight of their growing feelings. She must have eventually slept because she woke to smoke and Vernon shouting her name. Katherine bolted upright, disoriented and frightened, then realized she could see flames flickering through the gaps around her bedroom door. She ran to the window and threw it open, gasping as freezing air rushed in, then turned back to the door. "Do not open it," Vernon's voice came from the other side. "The fire is in the hallway. Can you climb out the window?" Katherine looked down at the snow-covered ground 2 stories below. "I would break my legs. Then hang from the sill and drop. The snow will cushion your fall." Vernon's voice was steady but urgent. "I will meet you outside. Do not wait, Katherine. The fire is spreading fast." Katherine grabbed the quilts from the bed and tied them together with shaking hands, creating a makeshift rope. She secured one end to the bed frame and threw the rest out the window, then climbed onto the sill. The cold bit at her exposed skin, and the drop still looked terrifying, but smoke was seeping under the door now, and she could hear the fire roaring somewhere in the house. She climbed down the quilt rope as far as it reached, then had no choice but to let go and fall the remaining distance. The snow cushioned her landing as Vernon had promised, but she still hit hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She lay gasping in the snow, staring up at the window she had just escaped from, watching flames dance across the ceiling of what had been her temporary bedroom. Vernon appeared out of the snowy darkness, scooping her up and carrying her away from the burning house. He set her down near the barn, wrapped his coat around her nightgown-clad body, and held her against his chest while they watched the fire consume the main house. "What happened?" Katherine asked through chattering teeth. "Chimney fire, I think. It must have been burning inside the walls. I woke up to smoke and flames already spreading through the downstairs." "I am sorry, Katherine. I should have inspected that chimney more carefully before we lit fires in every room." His arms tightened around her. "When I could not reach you through the hallway, when I thought you might be trapped up there, I have never been so frightened in my life." "I am all right," Katherine assured him, though she was shaking violently from cold and shock. "We are both all right." They huddled together in the barn while the house burned, the flames casting dancing shadows across the snow and lighting up the night sky. There was nothing they could do to save the structure. No town fire brigade this far from Nebraska City. No way to pump enough water to fight a fire that had already engulfed the building. They could only watch as weeks of their careful repair work was consumed by flames. By dawn, the fire had burned itself out, leaving a smoking ruin of collapsed walls and charred timber where the house had stood. Katherine and Vernon, exhausted and numb with cold, surveyed the destruction in the gray morning light. "We will rebuild," Vernon said firmly. "It is a setback, but we still have the barn, the outbuildings, the corrals. We have tools and knowledge. We can start again." Katherine looked at him, this man who had just lost the primary building on his property, who had every right to be devastated or furious, and saw only determination and resilience. She felt something shift inside her chest, a final barrier falling away. "We will rebuild together," she corrected. "Partners, remember." Vernon smiled despite the circumstances, reaching out to take her hand. "Partners," he agreed. They moved Katherine's belongings from her cabin to the barn's small tack room, converting it into temporary living quarters until they could determine the best path forward. The tack room was cramped and smelled of leather and hay, but it was warm and weatherproof, and Katherine made it as comfortable as possible with the limited resources available. Vernon insisted on sleeping in the main barn space, giving Katherine complete privacy in the tack room. They established new routines around the changed circumstances, cooking simple meals on a small stove in the barn, drawing water from the creek together, working on plans for rebuilding while maintaining the daily tasks required to keep the livestock healthy through winter. The fire had consumed not just the house, but many of their tools and supplies that had been stored inside. Katherine felt the loss of Richard's tools acutely, mourning them as if losing a piece of him again. But Vernon pointed out that their most important assets remained intact: the land, the barn and outbuildings, the livestock, and most critically, their partnership and shared determination. "Things can be replaced," he told her as they sorted through what could be salvaged from the house ruins. "What matters is that we both survived. Everything else is just material goods." A week after the fire, Vernon rode into Nebraska City to file an insurance claim and purchase emergency supplies. He returned with unexpected news. "I spoke with Reverend Thomas while I was in town," he said. "Told him about the fire and our plans to rebuild. He mentioned that if we were married, certain aspects of rebuilding would be easier: access to credit, legal issues with shared property ownership, that sort of thing. He was not pushing, just making an observation." Katherine felt her heart rate increase. "And what do you think about that observation?" Vernon was quiet for a long moment, watching her face carefully. "I think the Reverend was offering practical advice. But I also think that if we were going to marry, I would want it to be for the right reasons, because we love each other and want to build a life together, not because it would make dealing with bankers easier." "So the question becomes," Katherine said slowly, "whether we do love each other or whether we are just two lonely people who enjoy working together." "I can only answer for myself," Vernon replied, "but I will tell you this. When I saw that house burning and thought you might be trapped inside, I understood that you have become essential to my life in a way that goes far beyond partnership or convenience. The thought of losing you was unbearable. That is not simply friendship or professional respect. That is love, Katherine, whether or not I have the right to say it aloud. Katherine felt tears sting her eyes. Richard was my husband for 2 years. I thought I would spend my whole life with him, and I loved him deeply. When he died, I believed that part of my life was over, that I would never feel that way about anyone again. She moved closer to Vernon, looking up into his weathered face. But what I feel for you is different from what I felt for Richard, and that does not make it less valid or less powerful. You have shown me that I can be strong and capable on my own while still wanting partnership. You have given me respect and trust alongside your affection. You have made me believe in the future again. Is that love? Vernon asked softly. I think it is, Katherine admitted. A different kind than what I had before, but love nonetheless. The question is whether we trust it enough to build our lives around it. Vernon reached out and pulled her gently against his chest, wrapping his arms around her in the barn's dim interior. Katherine relaxed into his embrace, feeling his heart beating steady and strong beneath her cheek. I trust it, Vernon murmured into her hair. I trust you, and I trust what we have built together. If you will have me, Katherine Lancaster, I would like to marry you, not because it is practical or convenient, but because I love you and want to spend my life with you. Katherine pulled back enough to look at his face, seeing hope and vulnerability in equal measure. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Vernon Walsh. They kissed there in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and animals, with winter wind howling outside and ashes from the burned house still visible through the open door. It was not romantic by conventional standards, but it was perfectly honest, perfectly them. They were married 2 weeks later in the Methodist Church in Nebraska City, with Reverend and Mrs. Thomas serving as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple dress made from fabric she and Mrs. Thomas had sewn together, dark blue instead of the white she had worn for Richard, marking this as a second chance rather than a first beginning. Vernon wore his best clothes, brushed and mended, his hair neatly trimmed and his face cleanly shaved. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Vernon kissed Katherine with a tenderness that made her forget the handful of other people present. This was theirs, this moment, this commitment, this partnership that had grown from practical necessity into genuine love. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and that night Katherine moved from the tack room into the barn's loft where Vernon had created a private space with hanging blankets for walls and every quilt they could spare. It was humble and temporary, but it was theirs together, and Katherine found she cared more about the man beside her than about the circumstances surrounding them. I want to give you so much more than this, Vernon said apologetically as they settled into their makeshift bedroom. You deserve a real home, Katherine, not a converted barn loft. We will build it together, Katherine replied, curling against his side. And it will be better than anything either of us could have created alone, because it will be truly ours. Through the winter months, they made plans for the new house, sketching designs on precious paper and debating the merits of different layouts. Katherine wanted a large kitchen with good light for cooking and preserving food. Vernon wanted a library, a real room dedicated to books and learning. They compromised and dreamed and planned, treating each discussion as an investment in their shared future. As Katherine became more comfortable with their physical relationship, she discovered that Vernon was as patient and attentive as a lover as he had been as a work partner. He paid attention to her responses, learned what pleased her, and seemed to find as much satisfaction in her pleasure as in his own. Their intimacy deepened alongside their emotional connection, each reinforcing the other until Katherine could not imagine her life without him. In early spring, They broke ground on the new house, positioning it slightly uphill from where the old one had stood, with better orientation for light and protection from prevailing winds. Vernon hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy construction while Katherine managed the finish work and interior details. The house rose steadily through spring and summer, taking shape according to their careful plans. Katherine discovered she was pregnant in June, the realization coming with a mixture of joy and fear. She had always wanted children, but pregnancy seemed like such a vulnerable state, especially living in a half-finished house on a working ranch. When she told Vernon, he responded with such delight and tenderness that her fears receded slightly. "We will be careful," he promised. "You will not overwork yourself. We will bring in additional help if needed, and when the baby comes, we will be ready." His hand rested gently on her still flat stomach. "Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for this gift, for everything you have given me." The baby was born on a cold February morning in 1878, delivered by the doctor from Nebraska City with Mrs. Thomas attending to help. Vernon paced outside the bedroom door, refusing to go farther despite Mrs. Thomas's suggestions that he find something else to occupy himself. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling with indignation, Vernon rushed in to find Katherine exhausted but smiling, cradling their son against her chest. "Thomas," Katherine said softly. "I thought we could name him Thomas after the Reverend who helped us both when we needed it most." Vernon nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. He reached out and carefully touched the baby's tiny hand, watching in wonder as miniature fingers curled around his own. "Thomas Walsh," he finally managed. "It is perfect." They settled into life as parents with the same deliberate partnership they had brought to ranching and building. Vernon proved to be a devoted father, waking in the night to walk the baby when Thomas fussed, changing diapers without complaint, and singing off-key lullabies that somehow soothed the infant when nothing else would. Katherine marveled at how completely her life had transformed. 2 years earlier, she had been a desperate widow selling her dead husband's tools, uncertain how she would survive the coming winter. Now she was a wife and mother, co-owner of a thriving ranch, with a comfortable home and a future full of possibility. She sometimes felt guilty about how happy she was, as if moving forward betrayed Richard's memory. Vernon understood her complicated feelings without needing explanation. "Love is not a limited resource," he told her one evening as they sat together watching baby Thomas sleep. "Loving me and loving our life together does not diminish what you felt for Richard. He helped make you who you are, and that person is who I fell in love with. We do not forget the past, Katherine. We just refuse to let it prevent our future." The ranch prospered as they worked together, Katherine's organizational skills complementing Vernon's ranching knowledge. They expanded their herd, improved their grazing land, and developed a reputation for quality livestock and honest dealing. Katherine started the small school she had dreamed about, teaching children from neighboring ranches twice a week in their spacious kitchen, finding satisfaction in combining her old passion with her new life. A daughter arrived 2 years after Thomas, healthy and strong, with Vernon's blue eyes and Katherine's determined chin. They named her Grace, because Vernon said that grace was what had brought them together, divine intervention that took the form of desperation and tools for sale and 2 lonely people willing to take a chance on each other. As Katherine held her daughter and watched Vernon play with Thomas, building elaborate structures from wooden blocks on the living room floor, she felt profound gratitude for the unlikely path her life had taken. Everything that had seemed like disaster, Richard's death, her desperate circumstances, the fire that destroyed their first house, had somehow led to this moment of complete and complicated happiness. Vernon looked up and caught her watching them, and his smile transformed his weathered face into something luminous with love and contentment. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am grateful," Katherine replied honestly. "For all of it, the hard parts and the good parts, because everything led me here to you and to this life we have built together." Vernon set down the blocks and crossed to where Katherine sat in her rocking chair, crouching beside her so he could look at both his wife and daughter. "I am grateful too," he said softly. "Every single day, I wake up grateful that you took a chance on a rough cowboy with a rundown ranch and more ambition than sense." "It was the best decision I ever made," Katherine told him, and knew it was true. The years passed, with the usual mix of challenges and joys that mark any life. There were difficult winters when livestock died despite their best efforts, dry summers when crops struggled, illnesses that frightened them until their children recovered, and the ordinary struggles of making a life from the land. But there were also triumphs. Thomas's first day working alongside his father, Grace's fierce intelligence that reminded Katherine of herself at that age, the satisfaction of watching their ranch grow and thrive, and the quiet joy of daily life spent with someone who truly understood and valued you. More children came, another son named Jacob, and then twin daughters they called Hope and Faith. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Vernon and Katherine working together as they always had, planning and building and creating something lasting. Katherine sometimes took out the partnership papers they had signed so many years ago, yellowed now, and carefully preserved in a wooden box Vernon had made for her. She liked to remember that their relationship had been built on respect and mutual benefit before it grew into love, that Vernon had seen her as capable and valuable when she most needed someone to believe in her abilities. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vernon surprised Katherine by taking her back to the spot where they had first met, the small homestead she had been renting when she sold Richard's tools. The house was long gone, replaced by a newer structure, but the land remained the same. "Do you remember that afternoon?" Vernon asked, standing with his arm around Katherine's waist. "When I rode up and saw you standing there trying to look brave while being terrified. I remember thinking you looked like trouble," Katherine admitted with a smile. A stranger offering employment to a desperate widow. It sounded like the beginning of a cautionary tale. "Instead, it was the beginning of everything that matters," Vernon said. He turned to face her fully, his weathered hands cradling her face the way they had that day in his kitchen when they first acknowledged their feelings. "You saved me, Katherine. I did not even know how lonely and lost I was until you showed me what partnership and love could be." "We saved each other," Katherine corrected. "That is what partners do." They returned to their ranch as the sun set, casting long golden light across the land they had worked so hard to nurture. Their children's laughter drifted from the house, and smoke rose from the chimney of the solid, beautiful home they had built together from ashes and determination. Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate widow to ranch owner, from grief-stricken and alone to surrounded by family and love. Every hardship had taught her something, every challenge had made her stronger, and every choice had led to this moment standing beside the man who had first seen her not as a tragic figure needing rescue, but as a capable woman worthy of partnership. "I love you," she told Vernon, the words as true now as they had been 25 years ago when she first admitted them. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Vernon replied. "Every day more than the day before for all the days we have left." They walked together toward their home, partners in every sense of the word, having built from tragedy and chance encounter a love that had endured and deepened over decades. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain as futures always are, but Katherine faced it without fear because she knew that whatever came, they would face it together, as they always had. Years continued to pass, and the ranch grew into one of the most respected properties in the region. Thomas proved to have his father's skill with livestock and his mother's head for business, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management, while Vernon and Katherine transitioned into advisory roles. Grace became a teacher like her mother, opening a real school in the growing town that had developed near their ranch. Jacob showed talent for woodworking that made Katherine's eyes shine with tears, remembering Richard and the tools that had started everything. The twins proved to be determined and intelligent, pursuing their own paths with the confidence that came from growing up loved and valued. Katherine and Vernon grew old together, their bodies wearing down from decades of hard work, but their connection remaining strong. They still worked side by side when they could, though now it was more likely to be in the large garden Katherine tended or on small craft projects rather than the heavy ranch labor of their youth. On a warm September afternoon in 1906, 30 years after that fateful day when Vernon had ridden up to buy tools from a desperate widow, Katherine sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and rose. Vernon lowered himself into the chair beside her with the careful movements of someone whose joints ached but whose spirit remained undiminished. "Beautiful evening," he observed, reaching over to take her hand. Their fingers intertwined with the easy familiarity of 3 decades of shared life. "They are all beautiful when I am with you," Katherine replied, smiling at how sentimental she had become in her later years. The young woman who had stood terrified beside a table of tools for sale would hardly recognize the contented older woman she had become. "You ever regret it?" Vernon asked softly, taking a chance on a stranger with a rundown ranch and more hope than sense. Katherine squeezed his hand, considering the question seriously. She thought about everything their life together had encompassed, the struggles and triumphs, the children raised and grandchildren adored, the ranch built from almost nothing into something substantial and lasting. She thought about the respect they had earned in their community, the legacy they were leaving, and most importantly, the deep and abiding love that had sustained them through everything. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "You gave me back my life when I thought it was over, Vernon. You showed me that endings can become beginnings, that loss does not mean giving up on the future. Everything good in my life came from the day I decided to trust you." "I am glad," Vernon said simply. "Because you gave me everything worth having. Before you, I had property and ambition but no purpose deeper than simple survival. You taught me about partnership and love, about building something that matters beyond just material success. You made me better than I would have been alone." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began emerging in the vast Nebraska sky. Lights glowed in the windows of their home where grandchildren were visiting, playing and laughing under the watchful eyes of Thomas and his wife. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together with respect and love. Katherine thought about Richard sometimes, especially on evenings like this when memories felt close and accessible. She hoped he would approve of the life she had built, that he would understand she had honored him by refusing to let his death define her entire future. The tools he had taught her to use had literally saved her life, leading to Vernon and everything that followed. "What are you thinking about?" Vernon asked, knowing her well enough to read her contemplative silence. "About how strange and wonderful life is," Katherine replied. "How tragedy and blessing can be so intertwined that you cannot fully separate them. If Richard had not died, I would never have met you." If you had not needed help with your ranch, we might never have become partners. If the house had not burned, we might have taken years longer to admit how we felt. All these terrible things led to something beautiful. That does not make the terrible things good, Vernon pointed out gently. Pain is still pain, loss is still loss. But perhaps we can find meaning in how we respond to hardship, in what we choose to build from the ashes. We built something good, Katherine said with satisfaction. Together, we built something that will last. Vernon raised her hand to his lips, kissing her wrinkled fingers with the same tenderness he had shown 30 years ago when they were young and full of dreams. "The best thing I ever built," he agreed. "Thank you for building it with me." They remained on the porch until Katherine grew chilly and Vernon insisted they go inside where it was warm. They walked together slowly, supporting each other, into their home filled with family and laughter and the evidence of a life well lived. That night, lying beside Vernon in the bed they had shared for 30 years, Katherine felt profound gratitude wash over her. She had been given an unlikely second chance at happiness, had found love in the most unexpected circumstances, and had built a life that honored both her past and her future. She had been fortunate beyond measure, and she knew it. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, not knowing if Vernon was still awake. "I love you too," came his immediate reply. "Always have, always will." Katherine smiled and closed her eyes, content and complete, surrounded by everything that mattered most. From widow selling tools to survive, to partner and wife and mother and grandmother, her journey had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth taking because it led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life they had created together from courage and need and ultimately, profound and lasting love. The end.